Okay, so I need to tell you about the year I basically started my own reality show, except nobody was filming and the only person voting me off the island was me. Let's start here. If you're the girl who grew up somewhere small, smaller than where you live now, you moved to LA for instance, and now you're terrified someone is going to clock your hometown accent or catch you calling a restaurant by its old name from like 5 years ago, I need you to know this. I already know. I know all of it. I can hear it in about 4 seconds, so you don't have to hide anything. I'm just very observant in that regard, and I'm never going to say a single word about it, so do not worry. Everyone has those moments and those secret fears about being exposed. It's totally normal. That is just kind of part of the LA initiation. You'll learn what to call the freeways and everything like that. It just takes time. I say this because I have been exactly as embarrassing as you're worried about being, just in a completely different scenario. Here's mine, and I'm going to take a deep breath. See, I'm not from a small town. I'm from LA, obviously. I've said that like 100 times at this point. But I'm from a very specific corner of LA, the Valley, the San Fernando Valley, which comes with its own accent, its own crimes, its own entire genre of humiliation. And I'm telling you this because I've worked so hard to drop my Valley Girl voice. But it has been since replaced with a dramatic vocal fry, which gets roasted on the internet constantly, but that is just a side note. What I actually want to tell you about happened my senior year of high school in government class during a 5-minute speech that was going to be timed. Here's the setup. Someone sits in the front row with a stopwatch. Every time you say like or you know what I mean, or any other classic Valley Girl lingo, they tally it. It sounds horrible, right? It was public humiliation for pretty much everyone in that class, which comes with the territory of going to private school. So I get up there, and I am gliding through this speech. I mean truly gliding, like I'm hosting the Oscars. I don't know very much about the actual government topic I'm supposed to be speaking on, that's a minor detail, but I'm charming, charismatic, I've got the whole room laughing. I am having genuinely one of the best days as a human being in high school. I sit back down thinking I nailed it. I know for a fact I didn't say or like once. Then the girl with the stopwatch stands up. And keep in mind this was a 5-minute speech. 5 minutes. She announces the tally. And I'm going to take another deep breath. Lisa said the word like 51 times. Totally 35 times. You know what I mean? 27 times. Should I continue? My jaw hit the floor. I truly could not believe those numbers were accurate, and I still don't. But I'm telling you this story because that was basically my whole childhood during one of many humiliating moments. But the reason why lines get a little blurred is because I looked like I completely belonged exactly where I grew up. Long blonde hair, always tan, always thin. I drove a white Lexus to school. I wore juicy tracksuits and True Religions like in their heyday. I had a hair straightener situation that I honestly am still very proud of. I was just visually like the Valley Girl from head to toe. But internally, I was picturing an entirely different life. One that I couldn't even like fully picture yet because in my mind, and as I mentioned last time we talked, I would have liked to be taken a little bit more seriously as a filmmaker. But what made this hard, despite the description of myself, is that I didn't grow up with artist parents handing me a paintbrush or an indie film that was going to change my life. Nobody was telling me to submit anything to Sundance, and I don't blame them, given the white Lexus situation and everything like that. And in fairness, I don't even know what my ideal childhood could have looked like, because I genuinely still don't know what my ideal adulthood could look like. But what I did know for sure was that I was not going to end up in the Valley. So I go away to film school for college. Not far. Northern California is like 6 to 7 hours away from my hometown, but far enough to put me on the map. A place to begin my reinvention tour. Meanwhile, all my friends pretty much stay in LA. USC, UCLA, LMU, and I go off to the exotic, faraway land of UC Berkeley. And that's when everything started. Suddenly, I'm surrounded by film theory and auteur theory and professors who are weird and queer and inexplicably hot. Everyone is a little bit obsessed with them and nobody can really explain why. And the thing about Berkeley that I loved instantly was that the weirder you were, the cooler you were. It was the total inverse of everything I'd grown up around. This was also peak early 2010s indie sleaze era, if you remember that. If you don't, picture every guy looking malnourished on purpose. Wearing skinny jeans, a tight ripped t-shirt, and some kind of mohawk situation if he really knew what he was doing. I genuinely had never seen anything like that, and I was captivated. Except I made one little mistake when the school year started. I may have joined a sorority, only because I was just a little bit nervous about not knowing anyone and not making any friends. And of course, I just kind of wanted to see if I would get into a top house, which consider that done. But once I actually met my roommates and saw the mohawks, I remember standing there thinking, okay, I have two options. I can keep my current look that comes with frat guys, the sorority world, entry into every party, or I can go the other way completely. I went the other way completely. No regrets. Because every conversation inside the frat guy, sorority version of my life felt like it was bleeding me a little dry. I couldn't entertain the finance talk and their secret drug problems and hearing all about their parents' money back in Encinitas. So my roommates and I rebranded to look the part with our preferred crowd. We went to dive bars now, underground rap shows, random tiny film festivals and theaters nobody had heard of. I stopped straightening my hair. I wore combat boots and high-waisted skinny jeans before they were cool while everyone else was still wearing flares. This look was a little disheveled on purpose, which if you knew me, was genuinely an enormous stretch. And that was my entire entry point into the world of the malnourished, deeply troubled, insanely talented musicians and artists who I found completely electric to talk to. I'll tell you more about that in another chapter, another time, because the poetry and the lyrics, they're like a whole thing. There's a lot there, but the point is, it worked. I put in the time and I came out the other side genuinely changed, like Indie Sleaze was going to be my final chapter. And then I came back to LA, and I was devastated. That specific niche film world, the cutting edge, brand new feeling I found in Berkeley, it just didn't exist here in the same way. Or if it did, it was buried and I had to go dig for it, which was not easy. At this point, I'm now 24, living in LA, getting picked up in G Wagons. I'm going to dinners at the trendy places where everyone's fighting for a reservation, sitting across from these executive guys with A-list clients who, and I want to be very clear about this, would not have survived a single night in Berkeley. Not one night. And they knew it, and I knew it, and we all just quietly agreed like no one was going to say it. Because on paper, I looked like I belonged in LA. I looked like exactly the girl who should be their girlfriend, sitting at the table in the dress at the restaurant, and so I had no choice. I basically started living as two different characters depending on the room. Old self, new self, except the new self was my real self. And I was the one who had to keep shoving her back down to fit into these rooms that I technically earned my way into. So I'm asking you now, be honest. Have you done this? Not necessarily the G-Wagon version, but it could be anything. A job you're qualified for that doesn't really feel like you. An apartment that photographs well, but it doesn't feel like you should actually live there. Or the guy who checks every box except the one where you actually feel like yourself around him. That's what I'm talking about. It's that specific disorienting layer behind everything that kind of just feels like a gut punch. And even when it's tearing you apart on the inside, no one would ever know. Because you do such a good job of looking happy to be there, which makes it very confusing that no one understands you're internally suffering. And for me, which is equally confusing, I always appear to be thriving, yet internally I'm just doing like an impression of myself. Sometimes I think back to what I wish someone had told me when I was going through this at the time. Because what you don't realize when you're in the thick of it is that your reinvention tour happens in chapters. Whether it's a literal move or you're rebranding your own life, environment is everything. But you can't always picture what the right environment looks like or even feels like, especially if you've never fully seen it before. And when you can't picture it, it is so easy, like dangerously easy to just quietly rebuild the exact world you were trying to escape in the first place. And I see this constantly with girls who move to LA. They want an entirely different life, but they don't have enough, we'll call it data points, to actually construct that new version. They end up building their next chapter based on old movies or TikToks or shows from like 10 years ago. So they land here, find out it's not what they were picturing, and then they accidentally recreate the mainstream version of whatever life they were trying to leave, just like 1,800 miles away from home. And that makes total sense. There's not really an easy way around that, because that vision you're holding, the one that only you can see, for your future, for your dream life, you have to let that come through without forcing it. It's going to get bigger and bigger as your world gets bigger, but you need to craft that vision carefully. That takes time and experience and a lot of heartbreak. It is totally okay if you don't have the whole thing figured out right at this exact moment. Because you can't just pull from these fictional depictions of what you think a city like LA is going to be like and think you're just going to step right into this whole new world. Because you're going to end up majorly disappointed. That's why so many people end up going back after they made a major move or like took this huge bet on themselves. So to really put this into perspective for you and maybe just to help you like glide through that next chapter, we're just going to think about dating. I want you to think about who you're naturally drawn to. Because a lot of times when you're reinventing yourself, the first actual step isn't to picture who you're going to become once you arrive, but to instead just picture the people you want around you. So we're going to start there because dating is where this shows up the clearest. And when I think back to my original Valley Girl look and who I was drawn to at the time, it was usually like frat boys and athletes and finance guys. That pairing just made so much sense to me on paper when I was growing up because that's who I always thought I was going to end up with. But once I went to film school and came back to LA, I realized how much I needed to be around creative people to actually feel like myself. And when I wasn't in that creative environment, like the Berkeley film scene that was basically just handed to me, I had to go seek it out on purpose. Because nobody just hands you your people if you're not being strategic about it. And the right people will change your whole life. You just have to go out and find them. And you cannot settle for the wrong people. So let's actually talk about the guys for a second because I think this is where it gets tangled for a lot of girls, including me. We've all just really been conditioned since we were basically toddlers to believe that certain types belong together. Think cheerleader and quarterback. That's the blueprint. That was basically handed to me since middle school, and for most people, that's the blueprint where they just stay forever. They just stay in the suburbs, literally or emotionally, it doesn't matter which. They're content there, they accept the bare minimum, they play it safe. But then there's us, and that was genuinely never going to be our option. Staying content with the original blueprint was just like never on the table. So in that context, if we're being honest about who you actually want, it's not usually the guy in the G Wagon. It's probably the musician type. The indie one, the guy who picks you up in the vintage Bronco, who takes you to the underground show instead of a reservation at Catch Steak. And that's where I have a lot of insider information for you on that guy. Because the indie guy, he can be kind of hard to identify correctly if you're new to dating him. Some of them actually have real careers, but some of them very much do not. Some of them have real talent, and some of them are just very convincing, but they actually have zero talent whatsoever. And you just kind of want to be a little bit careful because the wrong guy will absolutely drag you down with him, and it will take you a while to even notice it's happening. Which is why the executive type, like the actual successful guy, can be so appealing. You will really appreciate him, especially when you've dated the struggling artist and it didn't work out. That's what kept happening for me, and I kept bouncing between these two extreme different types of guys for so long. I would either date the full creative type or the full executive type, like polar opposites, which was really just a reflection of me feeling torn between my own two identities. But here's the thing you really have to sit with for a second. You usually don't just pick the wrong guy once. Most girls pick the wrong guy over and over and over again. You might date one version of the executive and it ends badly, so you swing so hard into the other direction. Then you date the indie guy and that ends badly too, and so you just keep swinging back and forth. And that's when you kind of end up getting stuck in that self-help podcast loop. Because it feels like you're learning and evolving every time, but you're actually just pacing back and forth between the same two extremes. And that's when it starts to feel like you're putting your dream life on hold. And like 5 years go by and it feels like you've hardly made any progress. And nobody actually stops to ask you why you're settling instead of just finding someone that has the balance you actually need because you probably don't even know what that looks like. So in case this is helpful and you know you're stuck in this pattern where you want to get out of it, here's how I learned it. And this is the part that I wish someone had told me sooner. Anytime it feels like you're choosing between these two drastic types, like you have these two major choices to make, there is almost always a third option. You just have to search a bit to find this one. Because what's usually going to end up being a really good match for you is somewhat of a hybrid. The guy who's creative, but he also has a business mind. That is insanely attractive, especially if you're the creative, artistic type, and you want to date someone who's actually interesting and isn't just going to bore you to death. He needs to have that spark where he brings out something in you where you feel so alive when you're with him, like in a way you've never even known before. You do not need to settle for the wrong guy just because your parents approve. And it's not just about the physical connection between you or the stability or the things that you have in common. It's about what he brings out in you, how he complements your strengths, balances your differences. Those little moments make him feel so dreamy when you're connected on that really deep level that only you two know about. And if you have settled or you are settling or you're about to settle because you just know yourself, think about it like this. There is no movie where the main character is enamored with a guy who just takes out the trash without being asked. The best moments in any relationship, they can't be put into words, but you know when you're in it and you know when you're not. And the real truth behind all of this is that when you still feel torn between your own two identities, that's when something is always going to feel off when it comes to the guys you're actually choosing. That's the real trap. thinking that you either have to choose between being the cool girl or the put together girl. Like you have to pick a lane before you can go any further. But the real key is actually realizing that you can be both and you don't have to choose. That's probably going to end up being the best version of you anyways, and I don't know why it didn't occur to you in the first place, myself included. Because once you actually believe that all of those qualities can exist in you at the same time, you stop shape-shifting depending on what room you're in. Then when you meet the guy, he becomes attracted to the whole version of you, not the one where you're picking and choosing between two identities at all times. So that's what we're really actually talking about here. Because once you understand how to create that balance piece within yourself, everything else starts to click. Your relationships, your career, your friendships, all of it. Because I will tell you this, I know exactly what it's like to navigate the world as one version, than to reemerge as a completely other version. And you don't want to keep just going back and forth because trust me, it is exhausting. And finding balance is usually the only way you can end that loop. And seriously, it just feels so much better to finally become the real you. And we will get into all of it. Don't worry, I have a whole plan in store for you. But for now, just look at it like this. The cool girl always comes out on top. It's really just all part of shedding those old layers so the real you can come forward. And you just have to own it and go through it and stop judging every single move you're making. And sometimes you have to just go undercover for a while your true self learns a few things. My whole point is that if you're going to go after the life you actually want, there are so many layers to it, more than anyone has ever told you up front. It is never too late to reinvent yourself. I need you to hear that clearly. It is possible. This is the hero's journey, quite literally. You have to go against the grain to get there. And the people closest to you now, won't even fully get it at first. They knew you as one version and this is going to look like a total plot twist to them, but just let it be what it is. Because even if you can't fully picture what your future life is actually going to look like, just picture a slow, deep indie film. Something that feels lived in and real. That's what you were made for. Because you're the cool girl. You always have been, and that certain feeling you're getting right now, just thinking about it, that's what's coming for you. That's your actual future. It's not about becoming someone else entirely or switching between characters at all times. We're just finally building the room that the real you can walk into. You know what I mean? Totally. Anyways, we'll talk more later. Love you. Bye.